From this point forward, when talking about subjects within the A2 syllabus or various units, I'm going to break up the videos into three parts. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this is Cambridge has changed the way they're asking questions at the end of the year. They're often, rather than asking about what psychologists have found out, for example, about group behavior in organizations, they might ask, like they did last year, tell what psychologists have found out about how groups are formed and the roles that they play within organizations. So it's much more specific to sub chapters of each unit or sub headings of the unit. So this will be one of three videos, and the first one will be on group development and the roles that people take within groups. All right, so what makes an ideal team or an ideal group? Well, we'll talk about Belbin's various roles that people play within a group and the 9 roles that seem to cover the gamut of skills or abilities or personalities that make for a good group. But first, let's talk about how groups develop. And this is developed by Bruce Tuckman in the 1960s. He had 4 initially and then 5 stages of group development. And these are kind of self-explanatory. You could look at the graphic here or look at your textbooks to see the 5 stages. 4 of them rhyme perfectly. The last one is sort of a forced rhyme or a slant rhyme. Forming, storming, norming, performing. And later he added the 5th stage, which was adjourning. Okay, so the forming, it is what it sounds like. You meet people, you have a sort of formal relationship. People tend to be more formal with strangers than they are with people they're intimate with. As people get to know each other, however, they become more confident and more honest. So there's more of a storming or competitive or conflict filled stage. And this is where people argue about how they should go about their duties. Norming is when people accept which method is going to be decided upon and they start to work together. And performing is the actual implementation of a plan. And the adjourning is when people reflect upon what they did. Maybe they acknowledge some good or poor performance, and they might break up or decide to form a different group for the next task. There's a video here on YouTube that's quite good. Whoever put this together did a very nice job of explaining the stages of group development by using the Lord of the Rings. Okay, so if you could find that video, it's very easy to find. I think you just type in Tuckman's stages of group development, Lord of the Rings, and you should be able to find this. And I had some students come up with their own examples, and it's amazing how many team-based films where people work together for a common goal, this 5-stage development plan works out for. Excuse me. So here we have it. One student submitted his assessment of the forming, storming, norming, and performing and adjourning stage of the Avengers. Here we have the same thing for Twilight, Sense8, and because I cannot resist, I did my own with Star Trek. Meredith Belbin came up with his own theory of what makes for ideal team roles, what kind of roles you want within a group, and there are 9 roles in total. That's a lot to memorize, but you could subdivide these by action-oriented, people-oriented, or thought-oriented roles. So here are the subdivisions right here, laid out pretty cleanly. So starting with the shaper is the one who sort of motivates people or improves other people's performance. He is the one who thrives on pressure, and he sort of sharpens the other people within the group. Just like iron sharpens iron, in that famous phrase from the Bible, the shaper helps other people improve. The implementer is the one who kind of gets things done. He has good organizational skills. He's very methodological. There it is, that word. And the finisher is the one who sees that things are complete in time. and this person might be a perfectionist. Then you have the people-oriented roles, those people who are better at more of the empathetic or the social skills. So you have the coordinator, who sort of is like the chairperson. He's a facilitator. Team worker, that person who encourages cooperation. And the resource investigator could find resources that are not just things, but people from outside of the organization. Think of almost like human resources. Then you have the people who are more cerebral, those people who are about ideas, and maybe they're not the most extroverted people, maybe they're more of an introverted type of character. We have the plant, somebody who implants ideas or is sort of creative, proposes new, innovative ideas. You have the monitor or evaluator who is a sort of a critical thinker and sees how things can be evaluated. And you have the specialist who might have a small skill set, but he's very good at that small skill set, very specialized knowledge. So, how do we determine who is who? Well, there's something called the Belbin Team Inventory, and you could find this on the official Belbin website. There are various tools that have been created since its implementation in the 80s, improvements and standardizations, and it is a paid for assessment. So if you want to pay for it, you're welcome to check that out yourself. They do give examples of various reports that are quite lengthy. So that's one of the strengths of this report system, is that they give you a lot of feedback. It uses something called a dropped points system. With most of the self-reports that we've used in the past, or any report for that matter, we often see things like Likert scales, rating scales, and things of that nature with numbers. This also uses numbers, but it uses something called a dropped points system. And what does that mean? What that means essentially is that you cannot distribute points or you cannot assign the same high values for each thing. Now, when people take these sort of self-reports, there's a tendency to answer the question in a socially desirable way. So, for example, that first item, I'm quick to see and take advantage of new opportunities. If I wanted to impress my boss, I might say, yeah, that's me. I'll give myself a 10. I'm seen as a natural team player, 10. I'm happy to take on varied work. Of course, that's me, 10. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. But because we're using a drop point system, we have to distribute only 10 points across these 10 items. So you can go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, but that really wouldn't show any of your strengths. So this is a way to ensure that people aren't just bragging about their personalities. They're actually thinking about, well, where do I want to put the most points? So as an example, just to clarify, if I think I'm a problem solver, I might put 7 for thinking outside the box or laterally to solve problems. And then I have only 3 more points to distribute elsewhere. Okay, it is available in multiple languages. Okay, might be interesting to look at whether there are some sort of cultural differences between various groups and how they respond to this report. And it costs money, which, believe it or not, is actually one of the evaluative points you can make about the Belbin inventory. One of its weaknesses might be that it is expensive, £42 per report if you're doing it within relatively small groups of 1 to 49 individuals. The more people you have, the cheaper it gets. It's a bargain. All right. So how do we evaluate these two things, Tuckman and Belbin? Well, we could evaluate it in the following ways. Let's first talk about the group development stages. One of the strengths of this is that it allows to see that conflict within an organization is okay. If people are fighting, if they're in the storming phase, some people might panic and say, oh my God, this is a disaster. But maybe that's a natural evolution of teams forming and working together. So it's not unusual to see conflict in the meeting room. One of the negatives about this is that perhaps there's no examples of how long these stages should take. You know, what if the storming phase lasts a really long time and people are stuck in it? They never get to the norming. So there's no preferred timescales given to say when people should move on to the next thing. And of course, one size does not fit all because it depends on the nature of your organization. So those are some simple evaluative points about Tuckman's group development stages. As far as Belbin's 9 roles, one of the strengths is that it has diversity. It's not terribly limited in what it's looking at. There's room almost for every type of person. So it focuses on the need for diversity, and in modern thought, diversity itself is virtuous. And the negative is that what if you have organizations that are less than 9 people? Maybe there needs to be people who fulfill multiple roles. So an initial criticism may be, it doesn't seem to work for smaller groups, but we'll talk later about how that might not be true. Actually, we'll talk about it right now. So if we look at an example of a report for a fake organization, you can tell it's fake because everyone's name is color, Peter Green, Joe Pink, Stuart Brown, etc. You can see that some people have multiple, what's the word I'm looking for? Roles. There it is. So for example, Jill Purple is both a team worker and an implementer. So while you may say, well, this is very reductionist, well, the fact that people could straddle 2 different roles may mean that it's not as reductionist as it seems. And I'm using the word reductionist very liberally, and I'll talk about reductionism a little bit later in this video. But you may see here the top sentence says, this report is based on self-perception plus observer assessment. And that is a strength of this study. Why is it a strength? Because it reduces the chance that the results are caused by demand characteristics, and also maybe it improves the reliability of the assessment tool. I may even call this inter-rater reliability. The fact that somebody knows that somebody else is grading them may force them to be more honest about who they really are. The other strength of this tool is that it can identify the hiring needs of an organization. So you see here, there are no strong examples in the following team roles: the plant and the specialist. Therefore, we could say that this is quite useful to an employee or an HR department who say, okay, we're going to look for people who specialize in whatever the project is revolving around. So maybe we need somebody who's an architect, maybe we need somebody who's a some sort of scientist of some sort. Okay. So let's talk about the evaluation a bit more deeply, because last year there was a question that was asked, and it's probably not going to be asked again anytime soon, but it's good to look at just to talk about what we need to look at when it comes to evaluation. Evaluates what psychologists have discovered about group development and roles in organizations, including a discussion of reductionism. Now, if you look at the marking scheme, anything else from this unit that follows group development and role assignment or roles in groups, anything that happens after that, after those paragraphs in your textbook, will not be open for credit in this answer or in the previous question, which is the described question. So if you talk about things like groupthink, cognitive limitations, conflict resolution, those things are really off topic. So you're really kind of relegated to only 3 things: Tuckman, Belbin, and the Belbin team inventory. So it's a lot more of a restricting question than the old syllabi or the old exams were. The old exams tend to be more open. I recommend that if you get this question, you first do the named issue. Get it out of the way. And many people hate the word reductionism because it's kind of a scary thing, especially when you're not talking about something that's biological or abnormal psychology. I think the word reductionism works best when you're talking about things like brain parts or brain chemistry, but maybe it's a little bit misapplied in other units such as consumer behavior or, in this case, organizations. So how do you handle this? Well, I would say maybe we talked earlier that the 9 roles in the Belbin model covers a large gamut of different types of people. So maybe we're going to say it's not too reductionist. In fact, it might be somewhat holistic, and then spend the paragraph talking about that. But after you're done with that paragraph, what do? You probably should do 2 or 3 more paragraphs for a total of 3 or 4. So various things come to mind. You could evaluate a theory. Are there 2 theories that are at odds with each other, competing with each other? You could evaluate research. Was there some research that had a small sample population? Was it not generalizable? Was it unethical? Did it lack sort of validity? Many students don't choose to do an evaluation of research at A2 because the research often is given in an abstract form, not in a deep form like it was in AS. But the easiest thing, or the thing that most students choose to do, is issues and debates. And these include things like nature and nurture, individual versus situational, ethnocentric bias, free will versus determinism, as we said earlier, reductionism versus holism, and usefulness. So it's a bit of a challenge. Nature, nurture, could that really be applied here? It's going to be rather difficult. We're not talking about schizophrenia. We're not talking about some sort of abnormal disorder. Free will versus determinism might be interesting, but I'm going to go here for individual versus situational explanations. Why is that? Because maybe by looking at people as a group and saying that they all develop in this following way, forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, it ignores individual variables. It assumes that groups sort of have a one-size-fits-all type of model. And then I might say, how useful is the Belbin team inventory? I talked earlier about how it could be useful for employees to identify areas of weakness and areas of need. So you have all of these things available to you when you do an evaluation. What scares students is that they don't know which ones to pick. I always say pick the ones that you can give the most detail about. Or I might even go outside of this graphic and say, let me talk about the reliability and validity of the BDI. Is it valid? Well, there's probably, did I say BDI? I'm sorry. I meant the Belbin team inventory. It's reliable because there's multiple people taking it. It's valid because it's resistant to demand characteristics and stuff like that. So as I said earlier, this question is probably not going to come up again for a couple of years, but it's a good way to get our feet wet when talking about how to evaluate the various subjects in the new syllabus. And I still call it the new syllabus. I'll probably be doing that for a couple of years because I'm an old person who misses the good old days of the 9-6, 9-8 syllabus. All right. Being sentimental here, I'll stop. Look forward to posting video 2 of this unit in the near future. Bye-bye.